Welcome to our deep dive on inherited family trauma. We're going to be taking a look at It Didn't Start With You by Markwolynn, and we're going to see how events from previous generations might be impacting you today.
It's really fascinating how these past traumas can kind of pop up in the present, often in ways that we just don't expect.
It is, and Wolynn's own story is a great example of this. He actually opens the book talking about suddenly losing his vision.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was an ocular migraine. Really shook him up.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And, he tried everything to get it back, from vitamins to intense juice cleanses. But it seemed like the more he resisted what was happening, the worse it got.
So it's that classic fight or flight response.
Right.
Eh?
But then he went on this incredible journey around the world, meeting with healers and gurus and searching for answers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And one guru actually challenged him, asking, "Who do you think you are not to have eye problems?"
Oh, wow. What a question.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, that would definitely make you confront some stuff.
Yeah. And for Wolynn, it really made him confront his resistance to accepting his condition. And here's where it gets really interesting. As he started to find peace with his vision loss, his vision actually started to return.
What?
Yeah. And even his ophthalmologist was amazed because, medically speaking, it shouldn't have happened.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
The power of acceptance.
Right. It really highlights that. But Wolynn didn't stop there. He started to see this idea of resistance and acceptance playing out in his clients' lives, too. They were coming to him with all sorts of anxieties and fears.
Right.
And he started to see these connections between unresolved trauma in their families and the struggles they were facing in their own lives.
Oh, interesting.
One example that really stood out to me was Jesse, this young man who was struggling with insomnia and was triggered by extreme cold.
Extreme cold. Okay.
And it turns out that this seemingly random fear was actually directly linked to a traumatic event in his family history. His uncle had frozen to death at the same age that Jesse was when his insomnia began.
Oh, wow. That sends chills down my spine. I mean, it can't just be a coincidence.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a whole field of study called epigenetics
Yeah.
that actually shows that trauma can alter how our genes are expressed, and those changes can be passed down through generations.
So, wait, you're telling me that experiences, especially traumatic ones, can actually leave like a mark on our genes that can be passed down to our children and our grandchildren? That's pretty intense.
It is. It's heavy stuff. But think of it this way. We're not just individuals. We're part of this larger family body carrying echoes of the past. And these echoes might influence our health, our behavior, even how we respond emotionally.
So, like, we're all connected to this web of experiences stretching back through time.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can see why we might repeat patterns or have fears that we can't explain.
Right. And what's amazing is that epigenetics also shows that these changes in gene expression can also foster resilience and strength. So while trauma can be inherited, so can the ability to overcome it.
So it's like inheriting a family heirloom, but this heirloom is the potential for resilience.
Yeah. It's a powerful way to look at it.
It is.
So we have this idea that we're carrying these echoes of the past. But how do those echoes actually show up in our lives? What are some of the patterns that we might see repeating?
Well, Wolynn uses this term entanglements to describe this. He suggests that we can unconsciously carry burdens from previous family members. He gives a chilling example from his own family. His great-grandmother blamed her husband for her death, and that blame seemed to echo down through the generations.
It's like these unresolved traumas have a way of seeking expression even generations later. Another example from the book is John, who unconsciously mirrored his father's experience of imprisonment and violent thoughts. It's as if those unresolved issues from his father's life were somehow playing out in John's own experiences, almost like an unconscious loyalty to the family system.
Loyalty. Wow, that's both fascinating and a little unsettling.
Right. So if we think we might be caught in one of these entanglements, how do we even begin to unravel it? Where do we start?
Well, Wolynn provides a framework for understanding and addressing these hidden influences, and it all starts with identifying what he calls your core language. These are the words and phrases that reveal your deepest fears.
Okay, so this is where it starts to get really practical. It feels like we're getting some actual tools to work with.
Yes, and these tools can help you become your own detective. He walks you through how to identify your core complaint, the issue that's bothering you right now, and then dig deeper to find that core language and even core sentences that capture your most potent fear.
So it's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion, getting closer and closer to the heart of the matter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then he introduces what he calls bridging questions to link those core sentences back to potential traumas in your family history. It's a way of connecting the dots between your present-day struggles and the experiences of your ancestors. Ultimately, this leads you to what he calls the core trauma, the root event that might be influencing your family system.
So it's like a detective story where we're using these clues to kind of trace the origins of our present-day anxieties. Do you have any examples of how this works in practice? I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about some real-life cases.
Absolutely. There's a case that really stands out, Lorena. She was battling bladder infections and this fear of losing control. And can you believe that this was eventually linked back to her grandfather's suicide?
Wow, I would have never made that connection.
Right.
But it really shows how trauma can resurface in unexpected ways.
Yeah.
Are there other examples where seemingly unrelated issues were linked back to family trauma?
Yes. There's Steve, who suffered from panic attacks, and it turned out those were connected to his family's experience in the Holocaust.
It's a stark reminder of how deeply those historical traumas can impact families for generations. It's not just personal or family events, right? Larger scale events can leave their mark as well.
Yeah. And it's not always these big dramatic events either. Carol's story is another powerful illustration. She struggled with weight issues and this deep fear of betrayal. And through this process, she realized that her anxieties mirrored her grandmother's traumatic experience during childbirth.
Wow.
It just shows that even seemingly ordinary events can have a ripple effect.
Right. It really highlights the point that we're not always just dealing with our own stuff. We might be carrying the emotional weight of our ancestors without even realizing it.
Right.
So what can we do about it? Once we've identified these core traumas, how do we begin to heal?
Well, Wolynn suggests a few powerful techniques. One that really resonates with me is the use of healing images and healing sentences. I think our listeners will find them fascinating too.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, these techniques are based on the idea that our brains are constantly rewiring themselves, something called neuroplasticity. By using visualization and positive affirmations, we can actually create new neural pathways that can help us shift away from those old fear-based patterns.
So we're essentially retraining our brains to respond differently to those triggers.
Yeah,
It sounds almost too good to be true.
I know, but there's real science behind it. And Wolynn provides some very specific examples of healing sentences that can be surprisingly powerful.
Oh, I'd love to hear some examples. Give us a taste of how these healing sentences work.
Okay, well, for those who are struggling with a sense of disconnection from their parents, he suggests sentences like, "I'll stop blaming you," which I know only holds us both hostage. It's a way of acknowledging the pain of the past while also choosing to move forward.
That's powerful. What about for those who feel like they've merged identities with the parent, almost like they've lost themselves in that relationship?
In those cases, he recommends something like, "I love you for who you are. There's nothing you have to do to earn my love." It's about creating a healthy boundary and reclaiming your own sense of self.
These sentences are so simple, yet they feel incredibly profound. What about those times when we're feeling overwhelmed by anxiety or fear? Is there a healing sentence that can help us soothe ourselves in those moments?
Absolutely. In those moments, he suggests something as simple as, "I've got you. I'm here. I'll hold you." It's like offering ourselves that comfort and reassurance that we might have missed out on earlier in life.
I can feel a shift just hearing those words.
Yeah.
It's like a wave of calm washing over me. So we've talked about healing on a personal level, but I'm also curious about how all of this plays out in our relationships. How do these echoes of the past impact our interactions with partners, friends, and family?
That's an excellent question. Our relationships are often the stage where these inherited patterns play out most intensely. Wolynn shows us how unresolved family trauma can create all sorts of challenges in our closest relationships.
So we're not just talking about individual struggles here. We're talking about relationship dynamics that can be passed down through generations, almost like a script that gets replayed over and over again.
Exactly. He uses a variety of case studies to illustrate how these patterns manifest. For instance, he talks about how the early death of a parent can lead to a deep-seated fear of commitment in later generations. It's like this subconscious belief that love inevitably leads to loss.
That makes perfect sense. I can see how that would play out in all sorts of subtle ways. Are there other relationship dynamics that he highlights?
Oh, absolutely. He talks about how some people unconsciously recreate their parents' unhappy marriage, almost as if they're drawn to those familiar patterns of conflict and dysfunction. It's as if they're trying to resolve something that was left unfinished in the previous generation.
It's like they're caught in a loop, repeating the same story without realizing it.
It's a powerful image, isn't it? And it's not always about these big dramatic events like death or divorce. He also talks about how sexual difficulties can stem from taking on a parental caregiving role as a child, or how a fear of abandonment can be linked to an early separation from a mother.
These examples are so relatable. I can already see how some of these dynamics might be playing out in my own life and relationships.
Yeah, that's the power of this work, isn't it? It shines a light on those unconscious patterns so that we can finally start to break free.
It's like getting a new lens through which to view our experiences. So we've seen how inherited trauma can impact our relationships. But I'm also curious about how it affects our ability to succeed or even our tendency to self-sabotage.
That's another fascinating area that Wolynn explores. He argues that these hidden traumas can hold us back from achieving our full potential or even drive us to make choices that undermine our own success.
It's like we're carrying around these invisible limitations, these subconscious beliefs that we're not worthy of love, happiness, or success.
Exactly. And he illustrates this with some compelling case studies. Take John Paul, for example. He was terrified of taking risks and succeeding because of a childhood separation from his mother. It was as if he was afraid to get too close to anything good for fear of losing it all.
Oh, that's so sad. His fear of success makes so much sense in the context of his early experiences. It's heartbreaking, really.
It is. And then there's Kevin, whose self-destructive behaviors mirrored his father's guilt over a sibling's accidental death. It's a tragic example of how unresolved trauma can ripple through generations, shaking our choices and even our destinies.
Wow. These stories are so powerful. They really make you think about the hidden forces that might be shaping your own life. This is a lot to digest, but it's also incredibly insightful. I'm already starting to connect some dots in my own life and family history. But I'm curious, where do we go from here? What's the next step in this deep dive?
Well, I think it's time we shift our focus from the general to the specific. Instead of just talking about these concepts, let's explore how they might be playing out in your life. What echoes of the past might be influencing your present.
Ooh, I love that idea. Get ready, listeners, because things are about to get really personal.
Remember that core language we talked about, those words and phrases that reveal your deepest fears.
Yeah.
Let's start there. Think about the struggles you're facing right now, the anxieties that keep you up at night. What's the core language of your experience?
And here's the million-dollar question. Are those really your words and fears, or could they belong to someone else in your family tree?
That's the question we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive. So grab a pen and paper, listeners, and get ready to do some inner excavation. This is where the real transformation begins.
Welcome back. I hope you had some time to think about those questions we left you with. Now let's dive into this idea of core language and how it can really help us understand those hidden influences in our lives. Are you ready to put on your detective hats and dig a little deeper?
Absolutely. It's all about uncovering those echoes of the past and how they might be shaping us today.
So remind me again, why is core language so important? What makes it the key to understanding these ancestral patterns?
Well, think about it this way. We all have certain fears and anxieties that just seem to pop up again and again, right? No matter how much we try to reason with ourselves. And these recurring fears often express themselves in very specific words and phrases.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. But how do we know if those fears are really ours or if they're echoes of the past? Something that we might have inherited from our family line.
That's when it gets really interesting. Wolynn suggests that we really pay attention to the language that we use when we're describing our deepest fears. He encourages us to ask, do these words genuinely reflect my own experiences? Or do they sound like something I might have heard from a parent or grandparent, maybe even a great-grandparent?
So it's about listening closely to the words we use, those phrases that keep replaying in our minds, and then considering if those words originated somewhere else in our family history.
Exactly. It's like tracing the lineage of our fears, going back through the generations to uncover the source. And it's not just the words themselves, but also the emotional charge behind them, the feels that carry the most weight, the ones that trigger our most intense reactions. Those are the ones that are most likely to be linked to those unresolved traumas in our family tree.
This is starting to feel a bit like therapy meets genealogy.
Yeah,
We're piecing together the family tree of our fears.
I love that.
It's fascinating.
It is. And just like with genealogy, the more information we gather, the clearer the picture becomes. So let's start digging into your family history.
All right, listeners, ready for your first assignment. Think about a specific struggle that you're facing right now, something that's causing you some anxiety or holding you back.
And try to put that struggle into words. What are some of the key phrases that come to mind? What's the emotional essence of this challenge for you?
Yeah. And once you have those words down, Let's take a trip back in time. Think about your parents, your grandparents, even your great-grandparents if you know anything about them. Did any of them experience something that might have generated those same fears or anxieties?
For example, if your core sentence is, I'll never be good enough, ask yourself, did anyone in my family history maybe feel inadequate or unworthy or like a failure? Were those messages passed down through generations, even if unintentionally?
Or if your core sentence is, I'm going to be abandoned, think about whether anyone in your lineage experienced a significant loss or abandonment or betrayal. Did those experiences create a ripple effect that might still be felt today?
The key here is to really look for patterns, for those echoes of the past that might be resonating in your present.
And remember, these connections aren't always obvious. Trauma can show up in all sorts of unexpected ways, so stay curious and open-minded as you explore your family history.
Now, to take this exploration a step further, Wolynn suggests creating like a visual representation of your family tree, a genogram, to see these connections more clearly.
A genogram. Is that like a fancy family tree with extra bells and whistles?
It's similar to a traditional family tree, but it goes beyond just names and dates. It includes details about relationships, significant events, and even emotional patterns that might have been passed down. Think of it as like a family tree with emotional footnotes.
So it helps us see that bigger picture of how these traumas have impacted our lineage.
Right.
That's a really cool idea.
It is, and here's how you can actually create your own genogram. Start by just drawing a basic family tree, including as many generations as you have information about. Then, for each person on the tree, consider some key questions.
Like, what were their major life events? Did they experience any traumas, losses, or migrations? How would you describe their personality? Were they warm and loving or more distant and reserved?
Exactly. And what were their relationships like, especially with their parents, children, and partners? Were there any recurring patterns or challenges that you notice?
And perhaps most importantly, what were their greatest fears and anxieties? Do they express any core language that resonates with your own?
As you start filling in these details, you might be surprised by the patterns that emerge. You might see how certain fears and anxieties or even relationship dynamics have been repeated across generations. It's pretty eye-opening.
And those recurring themes, those echoes of the past, are often the key to understanding those hidden influences that are shaping our lives today. It's like putting together a puzzle. But instead of a picture, we're creating a deeper understanding of ourselves.
Oh, that's a beautiful way to put it. It's a journey of self-discovery.
Okay, so we've got our core language identified, we're starting to build our genograms, and hopefully some aha moments are starting to surface.
Yeah.
But what do we do with this information? How do we actually start to heal from these inherited traumas?
That's a great question, and it's one that we'll be exploring in more detail in the next part of our deep dive. But for now, I want to leave you with this thought.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Once you've identified that core trauma that's been influencing your life, it's essential to approach it with compassion, both for yourself and for the ancestors who carried that burden before you.
Compassion for ourselves and for those who came before us.
Yeah.
It's a powerful reminder.
It is. Remember, they did the best they could with the resources they had. And by bringing this trauma into the light of awareness, you're not only healing yourself, but also helping to break the cycle for future generations.
That's a beautiful thought. So take some time to reflect on these insights, listeners. Let those connections marinate. And we'll be back soon to guide you through the next stage of this healing journey. Are you ready to explore some practical tools for healing? Welcome back. We've covered a lot of ground so far. We've explored the science behind inherited family trauma and looked at some fascinating case studies. But now I'm curious, what can you actually do with all this information? How can you use these insights to heal and create positive change?
That's the empowering part of this work. It's not about erasing the past, but transforming how it affects you in the present. And Wolynn gives us some really practical tools to do just that.
We touched on those healing sentences earlier, and I have to admit they sound almost too simple to be effective. But I'm sensing there's a real power in their directness.
You know, sometimes the simplest tools are the most profound. These sentences work because they directly address that emotional wound, offering an antidote to that core fear you've identified.
I think our listeners are eager to try these out. Can you give us some more examples of how we can craft those healing sentences?
Absolutely. Let's say you've discovered this fear of failure that you've traced back to a grandparent who lost everything in a business venture. A healing sentence could be, even though you lost everything, I will succeed in my own way, honoring your resilience.
So we're acknowledging the pain of the past, but also declaring a different future for ourselves.
Exactly. It's about separating our story from the stories that came before us.
What about fears of abandonment? We know those are really common. What would a healing sentence look like for that?
If your family history reveals a pattern of early separation, you might try something like, even though you had to leave, I am safe and loved now. I can connect without fear.
It's like we're offering ourselves the reassurance that we might have longed for as a child. It's really beautiful.
It is, and these are just a starting point, of course. You can adapt these sentences to fit your specific situation and the core language you've identified.
So they're like tiny but mighty affirmations that can help us reframe those old beliefs.
Yeah.
But Wolynn doesn't stop there, does he? He takes it a step further with what he calls healing images.
Yes, visualization is a powerful tool that can really work hand in hand with these healing sentences. You see, our brains don't always distinguish between imagined experiences and real ones. So creating a positive image can have a really profound impact on our emotional state.
So if my fear is being alone, I might picture myself surrounded by loving friends and family, really feeling that sense of connection.
Exactly. You're replacing that old image, perhaps of a child left alone, with a new one of belonging and support. And the more you revisit this image, the more you're actually rewiring your brain's emotional response to those old triggers.
This all ties back to that idea of neuroplasticity, right? We're literally changing the structure of our brains.
That's right. It's incredible. We're not stuck with the patterns we inherited. With effort and intention, we can create new pathways of peace and well-being.
So much of this work seems to be about taking back our power. We're not just victims of our past. We have the ability to choose how we respond.
Absolutely.
And healing isn't just an internal process. Wolynn also talks about how we can address these echoes of the past in our relationships as well.
Right, because our relationships are often where these inherited patterns play out the most.
Right. So how can we start to shift those dynamics?
Well, awareness is key. Instead of blaming yourself or your partner for those challenges that you're facing, try to see those challenges as an opportunity to heal something from the past.
So say I keep attracting emotionally unavailable partners, and my genogram shows this pattern of that in my family. What can I do? It feels like I'm stuck.
Well, it's not about blame. It's about understanding. You might say to yourself, this isn't just about this relationship. It's about a pattern that's been playing out for generations, and I have the power to choose differently.
That's a powerful way to reframe it.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off and allows us to see it in this larger context.
Yeah. And you can also use those healing sentences and images within the context of your relationships, too. Imagine your partner offering you that love and security that might have been missing in your family history. Feel that healing energy flowing between you.
So it's like we're actively creating a new experience, a new blueprint for how we relate to others.
And that new blueprint can have a ripple effect, not only in your own life, but also in the lives of your children and future generations.
This is really powerful stuff, but I can imagine some listeners might be feeling a little overwhelmed at this point. It's a lot to process.
Yeah, it is.
What advice would you give to someone who's just starting to explore these ideas?
I would say start slowly. Be gentle with yourself. You don't have to uncover everything at once. Maybe focus on one core sentence or one ancestral pattern that feels most relevant to your struggles right now.
That's good advice. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement and want to do too much too soon.
Right. And remember, you don't have to do this work alone. There are therapists and practitioners who specialize in family trauma. They can offer guidance and support as you navigate these complex emotions.
Even just having conversations with family members can be really illuminating, too. Sharing what you're discovering can open up new understandings and maybe even start a ripple effect of healing within your own family.
Yeah, I love that image of a ripple effect. It reminds us that healing isn't just an individual pursuit, it's something that can transform entire families and communities.
So what does all of this mean for you, dear listener? As we wrap up this...
The fears that seem to have a life of their own. Ask yourself, are these truly mine? Or could they be echoes of the past whispering in my ear?
By uncovering those echoes, understanding their origins, and offering them compassion and healing, you're not only liberating yourself, but also future generations. You're giving them a lighter, brighter legacy.
It's a journey of self-discovery and empowerment. And it all begins with a single question. What echoes of the past are you ready to release? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's been insightful and empowering for you. Until next time, keep exploring, keep healing, and keep creating the life you truly desire.